Let's understand as to what a pointer is. Definitely, in most of the placement papers, there will always be questions asked on pointers, and I know this is one such topic which most of my learners are not confident about. But then, if you will have to understand pointers, first check if you can understand these declaration statements. These are some of the declaration statements which you should be able to read if in case you have to have a complete grip over the concept of pointers. Now, let me ask you a question. What is that first declaration statement? How would you read it? I think most of you would be reading it as int star p. The second one, you would be reading it as int star star p. Maybe the next one as int star 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 p. The next one as int star p of 5 and so on. And let me tell you that in case you are reading it like that, then there is no way that you would be able to understand and appreciate the concept of pointers. Yes, I am supposed to tell you the definition of the pointer. I am supposed to tell you what really is the use of pointers, and really why is it that only C language explicitly supports the concept of pointers, but Java and Python don't support the concept of pointers explicitly. But then let's keep all that aside. First, let us see if we can actually read these declarations properly. But then, as of now, what I see is that probably most of my learners don't know as to how to read these declaration statements. So let me help you. For example, in this case, you should never read it as int star p. You should never read it from left to right the way you read English statements. You should not do that. There is a certain technique to read the declaration statements, and the technique is that you have to start with the variable, go ahead till you hit the delimiter. In this case, semicolon is the delimiter, and once you hit the delimiter, you have to get back step by step. Now, what it means, let me demonstrate it in this case for you, that you have to start from the variable, go till you hit the dead end, and then you have to get back step by step. That way, if I would read the first statement, it would read it as p is a pointer to an integer. That is the way we need to read. So, let me repeat. Start with the variable, go ahead till you hit the delimiter, and then get back step by step. So, going by those rules, you can read this as p is a pointer to an integer, and that is what is being shown there. And if you would ask, how is it that it's going to look pictorially? Well, that is the way it's going to look pictorially. So, I'm sure now you have understood the technique of reading it. So, going by the same rules, if you will have to read this, how are you going to read it? Pretty simple, right? That p is a pointer to an integer, and that is what is being shown there. And obviously, the pictorial representation is going to look like that. So, I'm sure now you are getting the taste of reading the declaration statements. Anyway, what is the benefit of reading the declaration statements properly? Well, the benefit is you get to know the memory map. You tend to understand as to how the memory allocation happens for each of these declaration statements, and that is very important for a programmer, that he gets to know as to how exactly memory is allocated on the memory device. Anyway, moving ahead, if you'll have to read this, I'm sure now all of you are capable of reading this, that p is a pointer to an integer, and pictorially, that is how it looks. But then, what about the next one? How do you really read this? Well, going by your style, I think most of you would have read this as int star p of 5. Now, pause for a moment. Forget about my technique. Think about your own technique. If at all you are reading this statement as int star p of 5, then it is for you to tell me as to how the memory map would look. Well, I think you understand that it is very difficult for you to even visualize the memory map. But then, if you would follow my technique, to that extent, it's going to be pretty simple. So, what is the technique? Let me tell you that you have to start from the variable, keep proceeding ahead till you hit the delimiter, and then get back step by step. That is what is the rule that I have told you. So, now if in case I apply it, then this is how it looks, that p is an array of 5 pointers to integers. That is the way that you need to read it. Well, let me do it again for you, that you should start from the variable, and in this case, P is the variable. So P is an array of 5 pointers to integers, and that is what is being shown there. And if you would ask how the memory map would look, that is the way. And you can notice there that P indeed is an array of 5 pointers to integers. That is what is being shown there. Well, going by the same rule, if you'll have to read this, and I'm sure this time most of you would be able to successfully read it, and I would read it for you, that P is an array of 5 pointers to integers. That is what it means. So that way, if you would look at the pictorial representation, that is how it looks. And look at the pictorial representation, you can notice that P indeed is an array of 5 pointers to integers. Well, what is the use of that is something which moving forward I would definitely tell you, but at least now you've been able to read such complicated declaration statements associated with pointers. Anyway, how to read this is the next challenge. Well, for those who have read this in your style, if you happen to read this in your style, then there is absolutely no difference between this and this. Because according to you, you would have read this as int star P of 5. And according to you, this is also int star P of 5. And that is the reason I told you as to why you should not read the declaration statements like English statements, starting from the left and moving towards the right. You should never read it that way. Then how do we read this statement? Well, all of you know the Bodmer's rule, which suggests that whatever is there in the brackets, first we should finish it off. First we should complete that operation. In other words, in this case, though after P you went ahead, but in this case, after P you cannot go ahead because there is a bracket. Because there is a bracket, you need to finish this bracket first, after which only you have to proceed ahead till you hit the dead end, and once you hit the dead end anyway, you would be getting back. In other words, if you will have to read it according to my style, then this is the way that you need to read, that P is a pointer to an array of 5 integers. That is the way that you really have to read it. Now, let me again repeat it for you, that you cannot say P is an array in this case. In this case, you can definitely tell P is an array because there is no bracket. So, according to the rule, you anyway have to proceed till you hit the dead end and then get back. And that is what we have done. As you can notice, that is how the memory map also looks. But in this case, after P, if you would proceed ahead, then you are not respecting the bracket. In other words, you are in many ways violating the Bodmer's rule, which is why it is your responsibility to first complete the bracket part, after which only you have to proceed ahead and then get back. So going by that, I would be reading it as P is a pointer to an array of 5 integers. And pictorially, how does it look? Like that. And there you can notice P is a pointer to an array of 5 integers. I'm sure now you have been able to understand as to how you can read these declaration statements involving pointers. But then there are some other questions that can be asked on this in your placement interview papers. For example, look at this declaration statement. Here, a question could be asked like, what is P? Is it an array? Is it a pointer? Is it both? Is it none? Such a question can be asked, and what would your answer be? Well, whatever is your answer, let me show you the verbal as well as the memory map description of this statement. Well, if you would look at the verbal and the pictorial representation, it's a pretty simple thing that P happens to be an array. Well, look at the pictorial representation. Isn't it appearing like an array? Or look at the verbal representation. You are clearly stating that P is an array. Yes, inside the array, there could be pointers, but that's not the issue. The question is pretty simple as to what is P? Well, P is an array. In other words, your right choice is the option A. Not just that. Just in case this happens to be the declaration statements. Now, if this is the declaration statement, then what is P? Well, again, if you would notice, P happens to be an array. And let me ask you this question, that in this case, what is P? Is P an array? Is P a pointer? Is it both or is it none? And yes, I'm sure most of you would have got your answers right that P in this case happens to be a pointer. So, it is such simple questions that would actually be asked in your initial technical aptitude rounds, particularly if C happens to be one of the programming languages that you have for your selection process. But then, if you don't know the technique of reading the declaration statements, then there is absolutely no way that you would be able to understand the concept of pointers. Well, before I proceed, let me ask you a question. I want you to read this declaration statement. This is the declaration statement for which I would wish you to give the verbal statement as well as the memory map. Anyway, by now, I'm sure my learners would have understood as to how to read the declaration statements involving pointers. But then let me tell you, you are still not capable of reading all such declaration statements involving pointers. Yes, now you are pretty confident of reading these statements and many more such statements. But then, if you really have to understand pointers in totality, you should know that all of this is what we call as pointers to data. But then, what about the pointers to functions? Well, if there is a question at the back of your mind that if really can we create pointers to functions? Yes, we definitely can create pointers to functions. In other words, pointers in C language can not only be created to point to data, it can also be created to point to functions. Now, what about pointers to functions and how is it really going to help us? Let me tell you.